She steps into the courtroom with an air of unshakable calm, a subtle smile playing on her lips that speaks volumes before a single word is uttered. Every movement she makes is deliberate, measured, as if she's already crossed the finish line. Her shoulders are relaxed, her gaze steady and clear, meeting the eyes of those around her with quiet assurance. The way she carries herself tells a story of someone who knows the outcome is already decided, and it's in her favor. There's no hint of doubt, no flicker of nervousness. The case against her, as far as she's concerned, is nothing more than a faded shadow, too weak and too fragile to stand up in court. The courtroom itself feels different in her presence. Where there might usually be tension, whispers, or the restless shuffling of papers, there's an almost tangible stillness. Observers lean in slightly, drawn by the contrast between the charged atmosphere of a trial and the serene confidence she exudes. The judge's eyes briefly lock with hers, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken narrative playing out. The prosecution's side appears subdued, their arguments already dismantled in their minds by this woman who seems untouchable. Defense attorneys exchange knowing glances, their body language relaxed, as if victory is not just expected, but guaranteed. Her story is airtight, or so it seems. There's no direct evidence tying her to the crime, no witnesses placing her at the scene. The timeline she presents is flawless, every alibi backed by seemingly credible testimony. It's a case built on gaps and assumptions, and she moves through it like a dancer who knows every step by heart. Her smile widens just a fraction when the prosecution falters, and the courtroom leans in, sensing the moment when the scales will tip irrevocably in her favor. Yet beneath this wave of certainty, a different kind of tension lingers, subtle, quiet, almost invisible. It's the anticipation that comes not from hope, but from the knowledge that in every story, there's a twist waiting to unravel even the most tightly woven fabric. The kind of silence that fills a room just before the unexpected drops, shattering the fragile peace. As the proceedings move forward, the air thickens with expectancy, a collective breath held tight in the chest of everyone present. No one quite knows what's coming, but the feeling is unmistakable. Something is about to change. The confidence that has shielded her so far is about to be tested in a way no one saw coming. And then, without a word, the screen flickers to life, revealing a piece of footage that will quietly, yet irrevocably, rewrite everything. Stay with me here. The detail that shifts the entire story is subtle, almost overlooked, but it's the thread that unravels the carefully woven facade. What seems insignificant at first will soon pull the truth into sharp focus. The footage begins with a steady, almost mundane scene. A quiet street, the faint hum of distant traffic, and then a figure moves into frame, her movements deliberate, almost too controlled. There's no immediate indication that this moment holds weight, but the camera's unblinking eye captures more than just an image. It captures a pattern, a hesitation, a detail that doesn't quite fit the narrative she's maintained so far. As the seconds tick by, the atmosphere in the room tightens. The watching faces grow more intent, each trying to catch the nuance that everyone else might miss. It's not the loud revelations or dramatic confessions that break the case wide open here, but the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in behavior and environment. A glance too long, a shadow that lingers where it shouldn't, a tiny object that appears briefly then disappears. This is the moment where patience becomes a virtue, where careful observation is the key. The footage doesn't shout the truth. It whispers it, coaxing the viewer to look closer, to question what's been accepted without scrutiny. And as more frames unfold, the cracks in the seemingly perfect plan begin to show, small fissures that will soon widen into undeniable proof. What follows is a slow, inevitable unraveling, a testament to how even the most meticulous schemes can falter under the weight of overlooked details. The turning point isn't a loud confession or a sudden twist. It's the quiet realization that nothing is as it seemed. The truth is nestled in the subtle, and only those who watch with care will see it emerge. She moved through the courthouse corridors with an ease that belied the gravity of the impending verdict. Her steps were measured, deliberate, yet fluid, betraying none of the tension that gripped so many others facing judgment within these walls. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of her lips. Not arrogance, but quiet assurance. Her eyes scanned the room calmly, resting briefly on the familiar faces of spectators and officials alike, as if greeting old acquaintances rather than strangers poised to deliver her fate. Her posture was relaxed, shoulders back, spine straight, but not rigid. She settled into the wooden chair in the courtroom with the grace of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. Her hands folded gently in her lap. There was no fidgeting, no darting glances toward the jury or the judge. Instead, she exuded a stillness that suggested control, a command over her own nerves. It was the kind of composure that could easily be mistaken for innocence, but in truth it stemmed from something far deeper, a conviction born of certainty. She had no fear because she believed she was untouchable. Not in the naive sense of denial, but in the calculated confidence of a person who had accounted for every variable and anticipated every contingency. The painstaking hours spent crafting her defense, the precision with which she had orchestrated every detail of her involvement, all culminated in this moment. To her, the verdict was a mere formality, a predictable outcome that would affirm what she already knew. The plan was flawless, and freedom was hers to claim. Her smile broadened slightly as she recalled the sequence of events that had led her here, a choreography of actions executed with surgical precision. She had ensured that no loose ends remained, no witnesses who could connect the dots, no evidence that could withstand the scrutiny of a seasoned prosecutor. Each move was a calculated risk, but one she had mitigated through careful preparation and a keen understanding of human behavior. She had anticipated the prosecution's arguments and prepared counterpoints that would dismantle them before they could gain traction. Her defense attorney, while competent, was merely a vessel for the strategy she had meticulously devised. Despite the high stakes, her calm was not born of arrogance but of knowledge. She understood the system better than most, and her confidence was rooted in that understanding. She watched as the jury filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and solemnity, yet she felt no intimidation. Instead, she saw them as pieces on a chessboard, their moves predictable, their reactions constrained by the narrative she had so carefully constructed. To her, the courtroom was not a battlefield but a stage where her performance would triumph. Subtle gestures punctuated her demeanor. A slow, deliberate nod here, a soft exhale there. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve with a practiced hand, an action so natural that it seemed almost unconscious. These small movements conveyed a relaxed sophistication, an unspoken message that she was in control. There was no need to mask anxiety because none existed. This was the moment she had envisioned repeatedly, the moment where all the pieces would fall into place and the truth she had shaped would emerge unchallenged. Yet beneath this veneer of certainty lay the delicate balance of a plan so intricate that even the slightest misstep could unravel everything. But she refused to entertain doubt. Her mind replayed the timeline, the alibis, the evidence suppressed or redirected. Each element fit together like the segments of a seamless mosaic, impenetrable and complete. The confidence she radiated was not mere bravado. It was the armor forged by meticulous preparation and unwavering belief in her own design. As the judge called the court to order and the opening statements began, her smile remained, a beacon of calm assurance. She was not merely waiting for judgment. She was anticipating vindication. The confidence before the verdict was her most potent shield, a silent declaration that she was, and would remain, untouchable. The courtroom buzzed quietly as the prosecution laid out its case, weaving fragments of circumstantial evidence into a narrative that, on the surface, seemed plausible yet lacked the solid foundation of undeniable proof. The crime, as presented, was a masterclass in subtlety, an event so carefully orchestrated that it left the investigators grasping at shadows. There were no witnesses who could place her at the scene, no fingerprints or DNA to tie her conclusively to the act, and no clear motive to explain why she would risk everything. It was a puzzle composed of missing pieces, forcing the jury to rely more on inference than certainty. Throughout the trial, the defense team emphasized the absence of any direct physical evidence. The scene itself had been meticulously sanitized. Nothing appeared out of place, no trace of forced entry or struggle. The The prosecution's experts could only speculate on what might have happened, their conclusions resting heavily on assumptions rather than facts. The lack of witnesses only deepened the mystery. Neighbors reported nothing unusual, no sounds or disturbances that might have indicated a crime in progress. Surveillance cameras within the vicinity were conveniently out of service, and the few that were operational offered nothing more than blurred, indistinct images incapable of revealing identity or intent. Compounding the difficulty was the ambiguous nature of the supposed motive. Without a clear reason for the crime, the prosecution's narrative felt fragile, as if built on shifting sands. The defendant's life appeared unremarkable on the surface, devoid of the greed, jealousy, or revenge that typically fueled such actions. Instead, the case revolved around subtle interpersonal tensions and vague suspicions, none of which could be substantiated with concrete evidence. This lack of motive left the jury to wonder whether the entire theory was an elaborate construction, a desperate attempt to fill the void left by the absence of hard proof. The prosecution's reliance on interpretation rather than tangible facts created a courtroom atmosphere thick with uncertainty. Each piece of circumstantial evidence was scrutinized for meaning, every silence and nuance dissected for hidden clues. Yet, the more the investigation delved into the intangible, the more the line between fact and conjecture blurred. It became clear that the truth might never be fully uncovered, that the crime was designed precisely to evade detection and consequence. As the trial progressed, the defendant maintained an unwavering composure, her calm demeanor unsettling those who expected guilt to manifest as discomfort or guilt-driven anxiety. To many observers, her quiet confidence seemed to underscore the notion that she held the upper hand, that the crime was as immaculate as it was invisible. The case, in essence, was a battle of narratives, one side striving to construct a story from fragments, the other skillfully dismantling each claim with the absence of concrete evidence. In the end, the investigation revealed more about human perception than about the crime itself. It exposed how easily assumptions could fill the void left by missing facts, how the mind seeks patterns even when none may exist. The crime's true nature remained elusive, a specter lurking just beyond reach, challenging the very foundations of justice and certainty. It was a case defined not by what was proven, but by what could not be disproven, a testament to the unsettling power of a perfect crime that left nothing behind. As the investigation progressed, the cracks in the prosecution's case began to widen, revealing a fragile foundation built more on conjecture than on solid evidence. Witness testimonies, initially thought to bring clarity, instead sowed confusion. Statements from key witnesses were inconsistent, often contradicting each other or shifting under pressure. Some recalled details with surprising certainty one day, only to express doubt or forgetfulness the next. These discrepancies undermined the reliability of the narrative the prosecution sought to construct, casting shadows over their version of events. Compounding these issues was a pervasive lack of clarity in the timeline. Crucial moments were hazy, with conflicting accounts about when and where certain actions supposedly took place. This absence of a coherent sequence made it difficult to establish motive or opportunity with any degree of confidence. Investigators struggled to piece together a logical progression, as gaps in the timeline allowed for alternative explanations to slip through. The prosecution's insistence on a singular interpretation felt increasingly like an attempt to fit square pegs into round holes, forcing coherence where the facts resisted alignment. Procedural gaps further weakened the case. Key pieces of evidence were mishandled or inadequately documented, raising questions about their authenticity and chain of custody. Forensic analyses that should have provided objective insights were delayed, incomplete, or inconclusive. In some instances, potential leads were overlooked, and standard investigative protocols were not strictly followed. These oversights not only hindered the discovery of truth, but also provided defense attorneys with ammunition to challenge the integrity of the entire process. The failure to adhere to rigorous procedures suggested a system struggling to cope with the complexity of the case rather than one confidently unraveling it. The prosecution's difficulty in building a strong, cohesive case was evident in their shifting strategies. Early assertions gave way to more cautious claims as the evidential support wavered. Attempts to tie the accused to the crime scene relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and speculative inferences rather than direct proof. The narrative depended on assumptions about behavior and intent that the investigation failed to substantiate. This reliance on implication rather than demonstration left the case vulnerable to reasonable doubt, a fatal flaw in any criminal proceeding. Throughout this ordeal, the accused maintained a steadfast conviction that the system itself had failed, not her plan. Her belief was not a denial of responsibility but a critique of a flawed investigative process that prioritized certainty over truth. The case's unraveling highlighted how easily a complex situation could be distorted when driven by preconceived notions and incomplete information. It underscored the dangers of rushing to judgment in the absence of clear, corroborated facts. The unraveling case became a cautionary tale about the limits of the justice system when confronted with ambiguity. It exposed how procedural errors, inconsistent testimonies, and missing clarity can create a labyrinth of doubt, turning what might have been a straightforward inquiry into a tangled web of uncertainty. In this tangled narrative, the line between guilt and innocence blurred, reminding all involved that perfection in crime and injustice is often an illusion. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had long since mastered the art of invisibility within the system. It wasn't arrogance born of ignorance, but a cold, calculated belief that the machinery of justice was no match for her subtlety. In her mind, every step she took was measured against the weaknesses of those who sought to catch her. A chess player anticipating moves several turns ahead, always one step beyond the reach of the law. Her conviction was rooted not just in what she had done, but in what she had meticulously avoided, direct evidence. Without it, she was untouchable, a ghost slipping through the cracks of doubt and procedural chaos. Her psychological edge came from understanding human nature better than anyone else involved. She knew that inspectors, prosecutors, and even judges were not infallible. They harbored their own uncertainties, their own hesitations about convicting someone without absolute proof. She fed off these insecurities, allowing them to fester and grow. The system, she believed, was built on the premise of certainty, but certainty was a luxury she had deliberately stripped away. When facts became muddled, when timelines blurred and witnesses contradicted themselves, the system's foundation weakened. She thrived in this liminal space, where suspicion existed without conviction and questions multiplied without answers. Time was her ally, a weapon wielded with deliberate patience. She understood that as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, memories would fade, evidence would degrade, and public interest would wane. The longer the case dragged on without resolution, the more her advantage grew. Doubt, after all, is like an infection. If left untreated, it spreads until it consumes the entire case. She watched the clock as it ticked away the urgency that prosecutors once felt, confident that the passage of time would erode any momentum toward her capture. Her calm was not born of complacency but of strategic calculation. She knew when to act and, more importantly, when to wait. Her strategy hinged on the absence of direct evidence. She banked on the idea that no matter how suspicious her actions appeared, without incontrovertible proof tying her to the crime, she remained beyond reach. Circumstantial evidence was fleeting, and in the absence of a smoking gun, the system's hands were tied. She exploited the gaps between what could be proven and what was merely suspected, wrapping herself in the protective cloak of ambiguity. Each denied accusation, each failed attempt to pin her down, only reinforced her belief that she was invincible, an untouchable figure dancing just outside the law's grasp. Her confidence radiated in every interaction, subtle yet unmistakable. She never faltered under scrutiny, maintaining a poised demeanor that suggested innocence not just as a claim but as a truth unshakable by doubt. It was a psychological game she played expertly, projecting calm where others expected panic, certainty where others expected guilt. Observers often mistook her composure for honesty, unaware that it was a carefully crafted facade designed to disarm suspicion. This self-assurance was as much a weapon as any physical evidence, a psychological barrier that kept investigators at bay. Yet beneath this veneer of control lay a keen awareness of the fragile balance she maintained. She knew that the system's weaknesses were her sanctuary, but that sanctuary was built on shifting sands. One misstep, one overlooked detail, could unravel everything. It was this tension, the delicate dance between confidence and vulnerability, that defined her mindset. She embraced the uncertainty, not as a threat, but as an opportunity, believing that the system's own imperfections would be her salvation. She was convinced that the law demanded certainty, not conjecture, and in the absence of direct proof, her freedom was guaranteed. The shadows of doubt were her refuge, and as long as they lingered, no indictment could stand. This belief fueled her resilience, allowing her to navigate the investigation with a steady hand and an unshakable resolve. She was a master of ambiguity, a figure who thrived in the gray zones where truth and falsehood intertwined, confident that the system, bound by rules, doubt, and time, could never fully grasp or contain her. The air in the courtroom thickened, folding in on itself like a heavy curtain drawn tight. Voices had dwindled to whispers, then to silence, as if the room itself sensed the approaching gravity. The usual hum of shuffling papers, the faint scrape of chairs, the subtle rustling of clothing, all faded into an almost reverent stillness. Time seemed to stretch, pulling each second into an endless thread that tethered everyone's attention to the same invisible point. Eyes that once darted anxiously now fixed with unblinking intensity. The judge's gaze, usually sharp and decisive, softened but grew heavier, as if carrying the weight of every moment that had led here. His hands lay folded atop the bench, fingers still, betraying none of the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. The jury sat frozen, their collective breath held just beneath the surface, a delicate tension humming quietly in the room's veins. She sat at the defense table, her posture rigid yet composed, a calm that belied the storm swirling within. Around her, the subtle shifts of others betrayed their inner turbulence, an almost imperceptible tightening of a jaw, a reluctant blink, the slow tilt of a head as if preparing to receive a blow. The prosecution's team exchanged brief glances, eyes narrowing ever so slightly, bracing for the moment when silence would fracture and the evidence would finally emerge from the shadows. The gallery, packed with onlookers, seemed to shrink inward, the faces blurring at the edges as if the weight of expectation pressed them into a collective stillness. Cameras poised, pens hovering above notebooks, all waiting for the invisible signal that would unleash the truth, or at least what the court hoped was truth. The air was not just quiet. It was expectant, heavy with the inevitability of what was about to unfold. Even the usual background noises, the distant hum of city life, the occasional cough or shuffle, felt distant, muted as if the building itself had fallen into a hush. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow, but even they seemed dimmed by the solemnity that had settled like dust over every surface. Time, once fluid, now felt static, a moment arrested in the thickest possible stillness. No one spoke, no one moved. The atmosphere was taut, a fragile web stretched to its breaking point. The seconds dragged and stacked, each one sealing the past and future into a point of no return. This was the junction where the courtroom's rhythm faltered and gave way to something far heavier. The collective pulse slowed, measured not in heartbeats but in breaths held and seconds stretched into eternity. In that suspended moment, the veneer of control that everyone clung to, lawyers, judge, jury, observers, felt as fragile as glass. The weight of anticipation pressed down, creating a silence so profound it became a presence unto itself. This was not merely a pause in proceedings. It was a threshold. Beyond it lay the unraveling of carefully constructed narratives, the collision of shadows and light, truth and doubt. She met the eyes of the prosecutor across the room briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was the moment everything that had been whispered and hinted at would finally surface, unalterable and raw. The tension was no longer just an abstract concept. It was tangible, a heavy force that bent the air and slowed the heartbeat of the room. As the clerk's voice finally broke the quiet to announce the impending presentation, the stillness remained, a heavy curtain waiting to be drawn back. In that charged silence, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, balanced precariously on the cusp of a revelation that could never be undone. The moment everything stopped was not just the absence of sound or movement. It was the presence of an irrevocable truth, poised to shatter the fragile equilibrium and redefine everything that had come before. When the screen flickered to life, a collective intake of breath swept through the room like a sudden gust. Eyes, once steady and composed, darted anxiously as the unexpected presence of the footage unsettled the atmosphere. The rigid posture of the judge softened imperceptibly, a subtle shift that betrayed the weight of what was unfolding. Counselors exchanged glances, their facades cracking under the strain of uncertainty, as if the very ground beneath their carefully constructed arguments was tilting. The air thickened, charged with an electric tension that seemed to pulse with every frame displayed. Some leaned forward, as though proximity to the screen might grant them insight or control over the unknown narrative emerging before them. Others reclined, their shoulders sagging, absorbing the gravity of the moment in silence. The usual rhythm of courtroom decorum fractured, replaced by a collective suspension of disbelief. The gallery, too, mirrored this transformation. Faces once marked by detachment now revealed flickers of astonishment, skepticism, and a dawning apprehension. A defense attorney, known for his unwavering confidence, momentarily lost his composure, fingers tightening into a fist as his jaw clenched. Across the aisle, the prosecutor's eyes narrowed, betraying a mixture of disbelief and strategic recalibration. The courtroom clerk's hands trembled slightly, betraying the human vulnerability beneath professional detachment. Even the bailiff, typically a bastion of order and control, shifted uneasily, his usual stoic expression slipping into one of quiet bewilderment. Energy in the room oscillated between restrained anticipation and palpable unease. Murmurs that had been suppressed now edged toward the surface, though no one dared to break the spell entirely. The unfolding visuals, though never explicitly detailed, carried an undeniable weight that seemed to press down on every soul present. Time itself appeared to bend, moments stretching as the implications of unveiling such evidence rippled outward. The defense team exchanged hurried, whispered consultations, their eyes betraying a mixture of hope and dread. Meanwhile, the prosecution's stance grew rigid, a silent acknowledgement that the parameters of their case had irrevocably shifted. The judge's fingers drummed lightly on the bench, a subtle cadence marking the passage of a moment heavy with consequence. The courtroom, once a theater of rehearsed performances, became a crucible where raw human emotion and the unpredictability of truth collided. As the footage continued, some jurors shifted in their seats, their expressions flickering between confusion and contemplation. The weight of the evidence seemed to erode previously held convictions, forcing a reconsideration that transcended words. The collective energy, once charged with certainty and direction, now hummed with uncertainty and fragile possibility. No one spoke, but the room resonated with unspoken questions and the silent reckoning of what this revelation meant, not only for the case at hand but for the fragile fabric of justice itself. The footage was more than a record. It was a catalyst, a force that reframed everything, compelling every witness to confront the unexpected and the unknowable. In that charged moment, the courtroom ceased to be merely a place of law and procedure. It became a living entity, breathing in the shock of the unforeseen, exhaling the first tremors of change. The reactions etched on every face, the subtle shifts in posture, the charged energy, all spoke to the profound impact of the footage no one expected, a turning point that would reverberate far beyond the walls that contained it. From the moment the footage first surfaced, there lay a small but unmistakable inconsistency, one so subtle that nearly everyone had overlooked it. It wasn't a glaring error or a dramatic slip. Instead, it was a quiet detail, woven into the background of the scene like a thread that didn't quite match the fabric. This detail had existed long before the courtroom drama unfolded, embedded in the raw evidence itself, yet it had never been pulled into the spotlight until now. The footage captured her movements with an eerie precision, a sequence of actions recorded without interruption or manipulation. Yet, as the frames unfolded, an element appeared that contradicted the narrative she had so carefully constructed. It was not a matter of emotion or intent, but a simple logical discrepancy, one that, once noticed, cast a long shadow over everything she had claimed. She had insisted on a timeline, a version of events that placed her firmly in control at every moment. But the footage told a different story. There was a moment, brief and easy to miss, where her actions diverged from what she had described. The detail was a physical object, a small item in her possession that shifted position between shots in a way that made no sense if her account were true. It was something tangible, objective, and undeniable. This was not a matter of perception or memory. It was a concrete piece of evidence that refused to align with her version of reality. Before anyone in the courtroom had even considered this possibility, the footage had existed, untouched and unchallenged. Investigators had reviewed it multiple times, yet it had failed to raise alarms until someone finally examined it with a fresh perspective. The fact that this detail had been present all along, unnoticed, underscored a critical point. It wasn't a spontaneous mistake born from pressure or fear. It was an error rooted in the facts themselves. This inconsistency unraveled the fabric of her entire story. Every claim she made about her whereabouts, her intentions, and her control over the situation was called into question. If such a basic detail could be contradicted by the evidence, what else might be distorted or fabricated? The logical implications rippled outward, forcing those watching to reconsider the reliability of her narrative in its entirety. What made this revelation all the more significant was its nature. It wasn't a moment of emotional breakdown, a slip of the tongue, or an impulsive action driven by stress or panic. Instead, it was a logical misstep, one that suggested a fundamental misunderstanding or misrepresentation of the facts on her part. This wasn't a matter of passion clouding judgment. It was a flaw in the coherence of her story. As the courtroom absorbed this new information, the atmosphere shifted again. The earlier shock gave way to a growing awareness that the case was more complex than anyone had imagined. The detail she never controlled was no longer just a minor oversight. It had become a linchpin, a key that unlocked a new avenue of inquiry. It demanded a reassessment not only of her testimony but of the entire framework within which the case had been understood. The subtlety of this inconsistency was what made it so powerful. It proved that even the most carefully constructed narratives can falter under the weight of objective evidence. And in this instance, it revealed that her story, no matter how convincing it had seemed, was ultimately undone not by emotion or accusation, but by a quiet, logical error, a detail that had existed all along, waiting to be seen. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Her eyes, once bright with assuredness, narrowed slightly as she processed the quiet revelation that had just settled between them. The smile that had been her shield, her armor against doubt and skepticism, began to fade, not with a dramatic shatter, but like a candle flickering in the wind, slowly losing its flame. It was a subtle surrender, not a collapse born of panic or anger, but one of quiet acknowledgement. There was no outburst, no desperate attempt to reclaim control. Instead, a stillness took hold, heavier than any words could convey. She shifted her gaze, no longer meeting the steady, unwavering eyes before her. The confidence that had once radiated from her like a beacon now felt exposed, fragile under the weight of the truth. It was as if the very certainty that had propelled her forward had become a liability, a crack in her armor that now threatened to widen. Her posture softened, shoulders dropping just a fraction, as if the burden she had carried alone had quietly become too much to bear. The room, once filled with the subtle hum of tension, now settled into a gentle silence that spoke volumes. The absence of argument was deafening. It was not defiance or denial that marked this moment, but the stark clarity of realization. She no longer needed to defend the narrative that had so carefully been woven, because in that silent exchange, it unraveled on its own. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came forth. The silence stretched, a quiet testament to the gravity of the moment. There was no need for harsh accusations or dramatic confessions. The truth had revealed itself simply through the absence of contradiction. Her confidence, once a source of strength, had become the very element that exposed the fragility beneath. It was no longer a tool to navigate the situation but a tether holding her back from retreat or denial. The shift was almost imperceptible at first. A subtle slackening around her eyes, a brief hesitation in her breath, but it soon became unmistakable. The smile that had painted her face was gone, replaced by a calm, almost resigned expression. It was not defeat in the traditional sense. Rather, it was the quiet acceptance of an inevitable truth. The realization settled in without fanfare, a gentle but irreversible change in the landscape of her demeanor. As the silence extended, the room seemed to widen, the space between them filled with the weight of what had been uncovered. The meticulous confidence that had allowed her to navigate so many conversations, to deflect suspicion and command attention, now seemed out of place. It no longer shielded her but rather highlighted the discrepancy, casting a subtle shadow over her presence. She remained still, the absence of words speaking louder than any explanation could. The confidence that had once been her greatest asset was now her greatest vulnerability, a reminder that certainty can falter when faced with quiet, undeniable proof. In that moment, the smile disappeared, not with the clash of conflict, but with the gentle, unspoken recognition that the story she had told could no longer hold. The room held onto that silence, a fragile pause before the inevitable aftermath, where actions might speak louder than words ever could. Confidence, when mistaken for infallibility, often disguises itself as arrogance, blinding even the most meticulous minds to the smallest imperfections. She had moved through her plan with an air of control so absolute that questioning her seemed futile. Yet, it was precisely this illusion of certainty, the unwavering belief that every angle had been accounted for, that unraveled her carefully constructed narrative. In the world of perfect crimes, it is never the grand gestures or bold moves that lead to downfall, but the overlooked, subtle details that quietly accumulate, whispering truths that no alibi or deception can fully erase. Her conviction was her undoing. It was a fortress built on the premise that confidence equaled correctness, that mastery over the situation meant immunity from error. But confidence without humility becomes a cage, locking its occupant in a place where doubt is unwelcome and scrutiny is dismissed. The room held its breath as the facade cracked, revealing the fissures beneath. The evidence, once dismissed or unseen, gained weight with every passing second, turning certainty into vulnerability. This fragile transformation is the hallmark of every failed crime that once seemed perfect, where the smallest inconsistencies, the faintest traces, emerge like shadows in the light, impossible to ignore. The irony lies in the fact that no matter how sophisticated the plan, how thorough the execution, the human element persists. Overconfidence breeds complacency, and complacency leaves doors open for discovery. The details that escape notice, an out-of-place object, an unguarded expression, a contradiction in timing, become the silent witnesses that dismantle the illusion. It is in these moments that confidence shifts from a shield into evidence, marking the path to truth with undeniable clarity. As the room settled into the aftermath of revelation, it was clear that the perfect crime had not been flawless. The beauty of justice lies not in the grand spectacle, but in the quiet persistence of truth, patiently unearthing what was meant to remain hidden. The story she once controlled slipped away, replaced by the power of evidence that required no embellishment or persuasion. Now, we turn the question to you. Which detail do you think ultimately exposed her? Was it the overlooked alibi, the subtle behavioral slip, or something even more unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And stay tuned for our next installment of Perfect Crimes Gone Wrong, where another seemingly flawless scheme unravels under the weight of its own imperfections.